This is from Whispers from Eternity. It says, "Lead my body chariot on the right path. Teach me, Lord, to conquer myself by myself. Bless me that my discrimination become the charioteer of the steeds of my five senses, firmly holding the reins of my mind. Let my soul, riding on the wheels of discipline in the little chariot of my body, drive triumphantly over the speedway of earth lives until, on the last lap of the last race, it finds itself safe, O King of Kings, in thy vast royal palace." I love the last lap of the last race. Marvelous when St. Paul was about to be executed. And he said, I have, I've kept the faith. I've finished the race. Yeah, I can only think of two of the three things he said. But he said, I've kept the faith. I've finished the race. And he said one more glorious line, which will pop into my head somewhere in this morning, and then I will offer it out. But I have kept the faith, I have finished the race. That's really what we're working with here. I was listening this morning to the last sort of set of recordings that Swami Kriyananda did, which was something called Ask Me About Truth. And it was Nirmala and Dharmadas, lifelong friends, and Swamiji, and they were sort of pretending to be less well-informed than they are, so that they could ask Swami questions about truth, and he could answer them. But their friendship and their long-standing relationship as devotees together continually breaks through. It happens to be one of my favorite recordings, because it's so at ease. Swami's just sitting in this very comfortable chair. He has a microphone stuck on him, and the two of them are there in various costumes that they wear at different times, and they come forward with these questions that other people might be interested in. But there's just such a relaxation. And it was largely, it was the end of Swami's life. It was the last year, maybe, that he recorded that. I couldn't remember. It would be the last year or the last year and a half. There was nothing at stake. There was nothing to be accomplished. Everything had been done. And for both Nirmala and Dharmadas also, many, many long years of devotion to the path of friendship and service to Swamiji. It was just all in place there. And one of the questions that Swami was asked, what has been your greatest accomplishment? And Swami just said, I guess I just hung in there, he said, like that. And then Nirmala said something about, well, you've had many obstacles in your life. How have you been able to make it through all the obstacles? Swami sort of shrugged like this. Then he said, what was my choice? To shoot myself? I didn't want to do that. He said, it had to be done, so I did it. Just like that. It had to be done, so I did it. Then, of course, he got more serious. He talked about accepting what God gives you, trusting God. There are many other more expanded answers than what he offered in that moment. But still, he was really saying the truth, that what else could I do? That was St. Peter's wonderful answer when Jesus asked at the end of Christ's life, when many disciples were leaving him. And he just said to Peter, are you leaving? Are you going to leave too? And Peter said, where could I go? It's like, what could I do? I can't just shoot myself at this point. If it has to be faced, the confusion, the desertion, whatever it is, what am I going to do? I just have to stay in there. Well, I was thinking about Swamiji's, the ease with which he spoke at the end of his life. And of course, he was much like that all the way through, but there was a different quality when the commission he had from Master was still in front of him to do. There was an unrelenting willpower in that. There's a quality when you have a task, and that task is not merely to create something that's within your power to create, but you're also pushing hard against other forces, whether those forces are literally oppositional forces that are manifested in your life, or just that what you're trying to do doesn't exist. So you have to draw tremendous energy, and especially if you're, as Swamiji was, as we all are, we're masters' instruments trying to establish this new reality on this planet, and there is a shadow force that always comes out against the light. And even if it's not active darkness in that sense, there's an unknown. There's the inertial resistance of delusion itself that has to be overcome. So it isn't just a matter of what you do. It's this constant focus of willpower to just break through. It's like solid ice you have to break through. Whenever I'm engaged in a task like that, which it has been my karma to face them regularly and recently even, it isn't just, I'm going to talk to this person, I'm going to write this document, is that the willpower must be focused without ever giving up. I remember when we were working to incorporate Ananda Village as a California city. It looks very little like a city now, and let us say it looked even less like a city in 1981 when we made the decision to do it. But as one of my attorney friends said to me, law is not intuitive, law is not rational, law is political. And therefore, it simply is what it is, and you find out what it is and you adjust yourself to it. At that time in the development of the village, we had a lot of trouble getting our plans through the county system because we had a lot of opposition from our neighbors. And we wanted to have control over land use planning, zoning. And the entity in California that had that control is a municipality, a city. And we researched it. We had two attorneys, two women who were both attorneys at that time in the community. She researched it. One of them researched it carefully, and what do you know? We could qualify as a California city. Wouldn't that be fun? From then on, my friend Ananta, who was always humorous, because I became the spearhead of one of the spearheads of that movement, he always called me Madam the Mayor after that. And whenever I would appear on the grounds, he was a gardener at that time, and he was always just dressed as a gardener would be. He would always pull himself up like this and make all the other gardeners stand up, and they would salute Madam the Mayor, and then stand at attention like the guard does for the President of the US. They would, Madam the Mayor would like this, and then I would walk by. We had a lot of fun. That's the only way I can put it, which is where I'm going with all of this. But it was an 18-month project, and it got more and more and more controversial, so that by the last hearing of the last round of that was in the largest auditorium that there was in the county, which held about 800 people. The thing went on for 7 hours. Everybody was against our doing it except us. And I actually got a couple of death threats by that point. It was memorable. And it was so much willpower. And it was like 18 months of absolute, constant, unrelenting willpower. And it ended abruptly because we lost. We were voted down. But the county had disobeyed the state attorney general, who said that religion could not be a factor. But religion was a huge factor, and they made it perfectly clear that religion was a factor. So it was an unfair decision. We were going to go to court. Swami just from night to morning felt Master saying, enough. You've done enough like that. And I was just like full bore, like, you know, like a cartoon or something like that. Just all this energy stopped like that. My response was one of the 2 times in my life I just got really sick with a really big fever. I was there, and I said to Swamiji, I don't mind losing, but I'm annoyed that the people who opposed us have won. They were 2 different issues. And then I got this fever, and the fever just burned all of it out of me. And when I woke up, I thought, who cares? We're just doing what God wants, and if this is what God wants, it's fine with me. Oh, that whole story is written up in Light Bearer and in Swami Kriyananda as we have known him. It was a great adventure. And it relates directly to what I'm talking about today. From 1971, when I moved to Ananda Village, until 1987, when I came to live in Palo Alto, where I've been ever since, it was my spiritual childhood, 16 years, especially the first 10 or 12 years of that. I often say I grew up at Ananda, but then people kind of look at me and try to do the math, you know, and I've either aged double or something. But I wasn't chronologically a child. I had to get an adult body before I met Swami. I was 22 when I met him. But all during those years, what we were doing was so madcap is the word I would use. It was tremendously serious. It was serious on a level that was so serious that it was absolutely joyful. It was the tiny bubble of laughter becoming the sea of mirth itself, which is Master's last line from the poem Samadhi. We were out on this bare land. We had very little of anything material. We were sort of dragging this community up from the ground like this. And Swamiji's willpower was absolutely unrelenting. He understood what we were doing, and perhaps more people around me understood. I didn't, is the only way I can put it, and I projected upon others my same attitude, but I'll just talk about myself. Swami had known Master. Swami had already been through his experience with being thrown out of his guru's organization, having to find within himself the confidence and the willpower to continue to serve his guru against the unrelenting opposition of all his guru bhais, all the people that he had loved and respected throughout his whole spiritual life. He had to go forward without any peers. It took me many years before I realized, because I thrived so much on my peer relationships, that we were in this together. And I realized Swami really had no peers. It wasn't until 1993, when we celebrated Master's birth anniversary, 100-year birth anniversary, and other direct disciples of Master came to be with Swami, that I comprehended how lonely it had been for him all that time, when he was finally with others whom they could say to each other, they could refer to Master, and they both had had the experience. He could refer to Master to us, and we could rise in inspiration, profound inspiration, and even attunement with Master, but we hadn't been there. But the point of all of that was, and it was very dynamic to my emotional life, that Swami was the grown-up and I was the child. And he was the father of my heart and spirit in such a profound way that I always felt safe. I always felt secure. And I had a detachment about whatever happened that I recognized much later wasn't really, well, let me say, this is the complicating factor. I was starting to say it wasn't earned, but I would call it effortless. I had an effortless detachment. Now, I don't want to exaggerate, because I was no saint, and my inner life was and is blissfully less so, but tends to be complicated. And it was no less complicated then, probably much more complicated. But on a very fundamental level, I do my little bit, whatever my little bit was, and I did my little bit with my whole heart. like that particular project and lots of other strange ones that we, not lots, but a number of other strange ones that we got involved in. I gave everything my whole heart. My complicated inner life sometimes caused my best efforts to be less notable and less effective than I might have liked them to be, but nonetheless they were the best I had to offer. But when things fizzled or didn't fizzle or worked or didn't work or seemed strange to other people, I never worried about any of it because I was a child and my father had it covered. And to a certain extent, that was exactly the right attitude, and this is why I hesitated for a moment. In many ways, that was a better attitude than what I developed later. Because at a certain point when I had to start, when Swami literally pushed me out of the nest and sent me off traveling and giving classes and eventually sent us here to Palo Alto to start, not to start, but to build on what was here. All of a sudden, Swamiji was still there, but other people thought that I was the grown-up in the room. I think that's basically what happened. It was still sort of a joke. In fact, it was, it was a really good joke. But nonetheless, I fell for it sometimes. And that absolute confidence that what difference did it make was gradually replaced by this illusion that I was actually making decisions and that my complicated inner life that often interfered with my effectiveness was now something to worry about more than I had worried about it before. I mean, it was always there, but it never seemed, there's a phrase we learned from our years of legal work. I love this word, dispositive. Maybe that's a word that's well known, but I never heard it except in the legal context, because there would be an argument and it would be dispositive, which meant it would dispose of the issue, I guess is what that word meant. So you could have a good argument, but it might not be dispositive. So I got into the position where my own decisions never had mattered before, because they were not dispositive. They were not going to decide the issue one way or another, because Swamiji was the one. And as long as I was moving in harmony with what he asked me to do, it didn't matter. When the other kind of goofy project I say this because this is exactly how he worked with me. Madcap adventure was when he started the Bicentennial Liberty Committee. And the Bicentennial Liberty Committee, you've heard me talk about this, it's also written in my books, was an effort to get the planning director fired and replaced with a qualified professional because her lack of professional skill was completely blocking the development of Ananda. So it was this political movement that we launched. My name then, well, not the name I used, but my name was actually Nan Savage, if you can believe that. And I became Nan Savage, secretary of the Bicentennial Liberty Committee, because we were operating in the county incognito. We didn't bring Ananda's identity into it. Swami was Donald Walters, president of the Bicentennial Liberty Committee, and I was Nan Savage, the secretary. Isn't that a great name, Nan Savage? Anyway, I was just thinking about that recently, and I would write all these letters, and it was madcap. Swami knew that the way to appeal to me was to awaken my childlike enthusiasm for something that wouldn't burden me, that I could just do. And so I just did all this. I went on the street, I collected signatures, I wrote letters to the editor, I held meetings with citizens, I went into the Board of Supervisors' place and I read, declarations and proclamations, and anyone from Ananda standing in those meetings was always a breath of fresh air, a breath of fresh air, because we were kind and we were fair and we could see all sides, and God knows I'd done this for so many lifetimes, I just knew what to do. And we got a lot of respect, and eventually she was fired. But I never worried. about any of it, not a bit, because I was following what Swami wanted me to do. So then I fast forward, and through all the years of helping to build this community, but fast forward to the last few years, and all of a sudden, I suppose it was partly when Swami died, but it was really much before that. I suppose his dying made it vivid to me. When I became, I guess enough was accomplished, that's actually what we would say. During the years when we were just trying to make it happen, trying to establish the community, getting the school going, getting this temple, working with all the incredible times the whole thing would just blow up. There was the time our entire staff rebelled. They all just told us that we were totally out of tune, and that was that. They did that at the beginning of a weekend retreat we were having together. Right at the beginning, they informed us that we were completely out of tune and they didn't really approve of anything we were doing. And then we got to spend 3 days together. It was meant to be a team-building exercise. That was memorable. There were, a couple of times the school imploded and nearly went to the ground, and it didn't ever, but we just had to wait till it sort of, blew over. Those are just a couple that come to mind. All of that unrelenting willpower that the policy was always the same. It doesn't matter what the storm is, we'll just stand here, and when it stops, we'll reassess, and then we'll rebuild with whatever's left. That's all. There's just this unrelenting willpower. So there wasn't time, as much time as there came after we crested that hill, to really think about nuances. But then I began to realize that I had lost that childlike freedom. And I think part of it, now that I reflect on it, is what Swami calls you can have the wisdom of innocence, and then you can have the wisdom of experience. And Swami always uses as the example when a 5-year-old girl was asked by a 5-year-old boy, "Are you a virgin?" And she answers, "Not yet," which is really a true answer, because she's not yet of an age where she even has any understanding of what that question means. She has to grow into the reality of the temptation and the potential of sensuality in human life before she can even intelligently respond to that question. And so there was a time, I think, in my own spiritual life, all those years with Swamiji, where I was putting out full energy, and I have a lot of it, and I used it all. Much of it was going more in circles than in a direct line, but nonetheless, I was doing my best. But I hadn't really, what is the exact word? I hadn't really understood the nature of the spiritual path. I think that would be it. And I think where that realization came for me was when we went through 12 years of litigation. And it wasn't the litigation itself. I think it was primarily one of the attorneys that was opposing us, who was such an evil person. That's the only way I can think of. When I wrote the book, I wouldn't even put his name in the book. I just called him X, and I'll just call him X here. And he personally is of no consequence. And even in the 12 years that we had to deal with him, he personally was of no consequence. But the reality of the dark force and the reality of what human life really can be like. When I was younger with Swamiji, he would say things. He would make blanket statements about the disappointing nature of life, about the struggle that everyone faces, about how badly people can behave when they get trapped by Maya and by delusion. And God knows, I thought about these things. I was Jewish. I was born in 1947. I mean, the Holocaust has been the killing of all those Jews and the Nazism. It's been like in my consciousness always. But I don't know. It wasn't real. And Swami would make these blanket statements about the nature of life, and I would inwardly reject them. I called them the things I put on the shelf, and I just dealt with the stuff in front of me. But then, going through that and having to deal with that man, I sat in a deposition with him, one of my attorney friends and I. And afterwards, it was a very strange experience, but we both felt that if he could have gotten away with it, he would have just shot us. I mean, you could just feel that. There was that kind of, you're not like me, and I can get rid of you if I want to. That was very, very sobering. And I think after that, I think I got sad, is actually what I wanted to say. And that my automatic lightheartedness, well, my lightheartedness was not automatic. And as the time passed after that, that would be the last 18 years, because that ended in 2002 or 3, something like that. There was a very different question that I had to constantly ask, which is, what has changed from when I was in my 20s? What is different about anything that's happening now than Swami calling me up and saying, let's start the Bicentennial Liberty Committee, and my just falling on the floor laughing. It was just the funniest thing I'd ever heard, that we would do it, and that he would call it the Bicentennial Liberty Committee, of all things. It just seems so madcap. He wrote later in his book about leadership, without mentioning my name, that you have to know what motivates people. And he was having trouble recruiting anybody to help him, but he knew if he presented it to me as, and I'll use the phrase again, a madcap adventure, emphasizing the humor, I would join him. And he was absolutely right. I just went through it, and we did it seriously, because Ananda's future was at stake, and we did get that woman fired. Professional came in, and everything ran from there. But he also always was making me laugh. But he was working with me, but he was teaching me. He was always making me laugh, because a tiny bubble of laughter, I have become the sea of mirth itself. So after all that litigation and all that we went through, now I needed the innocence of experience. Now I couldn't just answer the question. And the fact that, well, Swami lived another 10 years after that, so it wasn't his passing that really made the difference. It was my realization that I have to finish the race. I have to keep the faith. And in order to do that, it takes absolutely everything that I have as a deliberate act of will. If you have good karma, as I did, there's a certain happy momentum. And if you have good karma, as I certainly do, at some point that automatic momentum will run out, and life becomes a deliberate decision for joy. And then, so they tell us, it becomes effortless bliss. I watched Swamiji actually go through all of that. I watched him all the time. I didn't understand how powerfully his decision for joy was, because he did it so well that the joy was always there. But there was this unrelenting willpower behind it, that at the end of his life, and I say the last 10 years even of his life, or somewhere around about 10, he was able to put down the willpower because it had become effortless joy. And that was when he would say things like, sometimes I feel so much bliss, I just don't know what to do with myself. And it was true. And that was when he would often say to us, and it was a hard thing to really understand, but by the grace of God, I'm beginning to understand it. He said, the only thing we have to give is bliss. He said, give other people your bliss. That's what he would say. And I would think, well, sir, first I have to have it. But joy is the beginning. And bliss comes later, effortless, after our innocence becomes the innocence of experience. This is the path the masters have blazed for us. This is the trail that Swamiji walked. And this is the path that all of us are on. What's our greatest accomplishment? Well, we hung in there. Well, we had a lot of obstacles to face. How did we deal with them? Well, what could I do? I don't want to shoot myself. So therefore it has to be faced. But there's much more powerful reason behind it. Because at the end, a tiny bubble of laughter becomes the sea of mirth itself. That's the divine promise. God bless you.
I've known them forever, they've haunted my slumber and called to me out of the deeps of space. The love that they promise has helped me remember another time, a caring embrace. Dark eyes in the morning, dark eyes in the evening, dark eyes in the morning, at end of day. Dark eyes that speak silence, they whisper, come find me. You'll never know true love if you stay. Now I seek them in the winter time, oh, I seek them in the spring. Those two dark eyes draw my heart away to where sun and moon sing. I laugh now in the summertime when ripples on the river play. I laugh soaring with the meadowlarks, love has made my heart gay. I laugh soaring with the meadowlarks, love has made my heart gay. I've known them forever, they've haunted my slumber and called to me out of the deeps of space. The love that they promise has helped me remember another time, a caring embrace. Another time, a caring